The second Thor film features an uninteresting story that is not supported by its action sequences, as they feel dated and lack excitement. It tries to insert humor to help its pacing, but most of it falls flat. Thor the Dark World sits at the bottom of the list because it feels like a chore to get through. Edward Norton was enjoyable as Bruce Banner in this early MCU film. Unfortunately, it feels forgotten as it does not feel a part of the MCU. But The Incredible Hulk is still a fun movie that eventually descends into a boring monster bash, leaving this film unmemorable. Captain Marvel tries to honor the 90s and late 80s in its film techniques and style. While it does succeed in this, it neglects creating an exciting movie. Instead, it feels like a cheap 90s straight to VHS rental, which is a shame because both Jackson and Middleton were great. The Internals features a stellar cast and offers some exciting action sequences. It also brings into the MCU some deep themes and interesting ideas, but the film's long runtime impacts the pacing and prevents it from becoming the home run it wanted to be. Iron Man 2 had the task of following up the first film, and while it integrates real-world issues and features a stellar cast, it failed to capture the intensity and fun of the first film, instead feeling more manufactured and by the numbers. And even then, Jon Favreau still manages to create a mildly entertaining film. Thor feels like a cross between Shakespearean science fiction fantasy and the film Starman. Kenneth Branagh is almost able to nail the landing, but cannot manage the pacing and sometimes dull feeling the movie exhibits. But it does just enough to keep you watching thanks to the chemistry between Portman and Hemsworth. Captain America toes the line between action realism and comic book fantasy. Its reluctance to fully commit to one side ultimately hurts the film as it prevents it from becoming an exciting and pulpy World War II action adventure. But it still manages to keep your attention and features a cool villain played by the wonderful Hugo Weaving. Spider-Man goes to Europe and the ever-excellent Jake Gyllenhaal joins the MCU. When the film is focusing on humor and action, it excels. But in between those moments, it is often slow and sleep-inducing. Tom Holland continues to shine as Spider-Man, and overall Far From Home is a lot of fun when it wants to be, adding important plot points for future films. Ant-Man and the Wasp continues the comedic ways at its predecessor. The humor hits most of the time and helps the film's pacing, offering a brisk, comedic superhero film with a standout cast. Ant-Man and the Wasp is a lot of fun, but it's not as strong as some of the other MCU films in the series. Iron Man 3 introduces some compelling themes and offers controversial twists that I personally found exciting and fun, but fans of the source material may be disappointed. The third Iron Man can be slow-moving at times, but does build to an exciting conclusion. Ant-Man goes the route of a comedic heist film, and it excels. There is rarely a dull moment, as the comedy is always prevalent, or the action takes center stage. There is not much to dislike about Ant-Man. Its style is unique to these sets of films, which help it stand out among the MCU. Black Widow finally gets her own film, and while it is not the strongest MCU movie, it does have a great supporting cast of characters, exciting action, and a few heartfelt moments about family. Its biggest weakness is in its villains, as they just serve as the punching bag at the end of the film. Spider-Man Homecoming did what at the time was impossible: make Spider-Man fun again. This time, we don't have to endure another setup film, as Peter Parker starts the film with his powers, which allows the story to focus on a relatable villain and on the character development of Peter and his friends. Homecoming is a ton of fun. Benedict embodies Doctor Strange, and the film attempts to make a mind-bending action movie. With Scott Derrickson behind the camera, they are able to accomplish the style they are seeking. But the real success is in its climactic ending, that deviates from the typical punch-out and gives a more unique villain fight. Black Panther blasted into the MCU with its own unique style, soundtrack, amazing cast, and features a highly relevant story. It has one of the best first acts of the entire MCU, but it's followed up with a boring second act and finally finishes with a by-the-numbers final. Even with its faults, its strengths are more than enough to carry the weight. Under the direction of Sam Raimi, the MCU gets its first horror film, and it works, creating an exciting and sometimes frightening experience. In the Multiverse of Madness is a unique and fun MCU film that I hope future Doctor Strange films will follow. Love and Thunder is reminiscent of Flash Gordon mixed with some heavy themes, and it all blends in nicely, creating a heartfelt, fun rock and roll of a movie. It introduces an exciting villain played so good by Bale that the film's greatest weakness is not featuring him more. No Way Home features some of the most exciting action sequences the MCU has to offer and is a real crowd pleaser. Clocking in at 2.5 hours, it feels like you're just waiting for the big events to grace the screen, making the film feel longer than it needs to be. Luckily, the scenes are worth the wait. The first film in the MCU hit hard, full of intense action sequences, great characters, all the while making the film feel grounded. Stark's press conference at the end was a game changer for superhero films. Upon my first viewing, I was not very fond of Age of Ultron, but after repeat viewings, it has grown on me, as I have found its action sequences sometimes feel like they were lifted straight from the comics themselves. The new characters were introduced expertly, and the film is full of small, humorous character interactions. Plus, the film sets the stage for many of the later MCU films. Civil War features a compelling villain and a tension-filled story that accumulates into an incredible action sequence. But it's not just great on action, but asks tough questions about the reach of a superhero should have and their impact on the world. The Winter Soldier may have saved the MCU from an early decline. From the opening action sequence, we get a clear picture this is not the Captain America or action scenes we are used to. The film feels like a Jason Bourne action thriller, and it's incredible for it. The action scenes and pacing is so good, Disney brought back the directors for 3 other films. James Gunn was a breath of fresh air with his take on the Guardians of the Galaxy. At the time, there was nothing like it within the MCU. It is a science fiction action and humor-filled wild ride that is backed by a stellar cast playing wonderful characters. Ever wondered what a Jackie Chan MCU film would look like? Go no further, as Shang-Chi captured the feeling to its benefit and features an action scene on a bus that I believe to be one of the very best in the MCU. It's not just the action that's still the show, as it does include some incredibly humorous scenes. Shang-Chi is a total blast and can still entertain with repeat viewings. Maybe it's the nostalgia talking, but the first Avengers is an incredibly fun film. From the banter between characters, the build-up and final action sequence, it is hard not to have fun with the Avengers, and I can no longer count the times I have watched the film. It took a director known for comedies to save the Thor franchise. He crafted a humorous, pulpy sci-fi action adventure with the help of a strong cast that features both Cate Blanchett and Jeff Goldblum. It's a film that remains a fun time no matter how many times you watch it. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is very much about fathers. It keeps in the tradition of the first film in bringing the humor and sci-fi action, but it's the film's tender moments that tug on the heartstrings that make this one a real winner, including its emotional final that will have you trying to hold back the tears. I'm Mary Poppins, y'all. From the moment Infinity War starts, it brings the action intensity and never lets up. And even with its hefty runtime, each action scene manages to seem fresh and keep you engaged. But it's the mighty cliffhanger of an ending that made waiting a year for the next installment feel like an eternity. Infinity War is an action masterpiece that manages a large superhero cast and a hefty villain. The conclusion to Infinity War wraps up a 22-film saga with a high-stakes mission and a grand finale worthy of cinema legend. The sheer emotion, glee, and excitement the final confrontation brings is absolutely incredible as we see the payoff of 11 years of MCU films. Find me a fan who did not have a big nerdy smile or shed a few tears by its end, and I'll show you a liar. Endgame is the very best of the MCU, and time remains if they'll ever be able to top what they created.
It's over!